Hello there. My name is Basil Malik, and I'm the president and CEO of Malik Inc. And today we're going to jump into the next episode of the series of Getting Started with No Code and talking about the MVP. That is not most valuable player in this instance, that is the minimum viable product. We've gone through the process of idealizing exactly what we are wanting to create with no code, and we've taken into consideration all the various different platforms that we might want to use. We've talked about many different things to this point. Now it's actually time to take all that talking and let's actually build something. From the last one, we talked about platform and architecture and which one we want to use. And we've been saying throughout the series that we're going to do a demonstration within Creatio. So we're somewhat cheating to a degree and knowing that Creatio was going to be the platform that we're going to use. So with that, let's clean up our board here, and we're going to select some of this stuff and just get it out of the way because we don't need it anymore. We're not doing any type of mind mapping or consulting or anything along those lines about which platform we're going to use. Now we're going to execute on this very limited vision here. In the corporate wellness concept that we have here, we have employees and we want our employees to log their wellness activities. Since we know that we're going to use Creatio, we're going to now start thinking of how this might look inside of the system. If we just create a new frame here, just do this, and we're going to call this our MVP board. All right, and here we're going to say there's going to be an account. That account is going to have contacts. In our example, inside of Creatio, when you've got an account, this is going to be our company, and contacts belong to accounts. We're going to do like this. And then we need a custom table because Creatio doesn't inherently have a wellness activity capability or a wellness program or anything along those lines. So depending on how you really want to architect it, this is where bringing your MVP to life is really important. At the very bare minimum, even if you don't implement your whole wide grand plan, you need to have some semblance of where you're going. Here's our MVP board, and we know that we're going to take maybe this here, and this is going to be a custom table, and this is going to be our wellness activity. We know that employees are going to log their activities. Now, where this gets really interesting is up here. We expand this ever so slightly, move it around a little bit, and let's select everything inside of it. Employees will have wellness activities, yes, but depending on how complex you really want to make this, maybe you want to have something along the line of a wellness campaign as well. And with that, you can actually make this a little bit more interesting in that employees have wellness activities and wellness campaigns are also that, and employees would otherwise participate in wellness campaigns. And you start to see this somewhat spidering effect, if you will, of how various tables start coming into play and becoming relevant to the long-term goal. We can build on this, but we're going to keep it very simple right now. The primary reason why I wanted to share this with you is that there are multiple ways that you can structure your MVP, but thinking of the long-term vision and where you want to go, it also helps establish a very good foundation from where your MVP is going to take place. Here, we can also take into consideration that we will want to also have a wellness campaign. And the wellness campaign will also have activities, and employees will call it participates in wellness campaign, contains wellness activities. Employees log wellness activities. And this somewhat helps us give us a little bit of framework as to where we're going to start with this. That's the last piece that we need to do. Now it's time to start building within Creatio. And the reason why we put it in this manner is it allows us to see what are going to be our standard objects that we can use versus custom objects. Now, I jumped a little bit ahead and just inherently knew that I was going to use accounts and contacts, but here's why. When you think about any system that you're using to execute this vision, you want to make sure you're using as much native functionality of the platform you're using as possible. Yes, we could, in theory, create an entirely separate table to house our employees, but honestly, that's one thing that Creatio already does. Contacts belong to our companies or accounts inside of Creatio, and these contacts actually have types. We really don't need to reinvent the wheel because a contact can be a contact at a customer, contact at a prospect, contact at a lead, as well as an employee. So rather than recreate an entirely new object within Creatio and create some sort of convoluted hierarchy, we're just using what's there natively. With that, we've got our basic foundation of what we're going to go with. So we clearly need two objects that we're going to emphasize. We're not going to focus too much on wellness campaigns. We're actually not going to add that in this video, but we will at a later point in time. But we do want to add wellness activities, keeping it very simple in the very beginning. We know that we want a wellness activity for our employees to log their exercises, the things that get them up and moving and make them an otherwise healthier employee. Inside of Creatio, everything starts with the application hub whenever we're building something brand new. And here we have our application hub. We're going to create a new application. We have a whole bunch of options, but I'm selecting custom because I'm building something completely from scratch. I don't need something that's been built by someone else. I don't need anything that's outside of the box. So let's pick some fun icon here. Let's do $sign doesn't make sense. Trying to find something that makes a little bit of sense for the wellness activity. Let's do this. Let's call this wellness activity. Here we have our application code if we want. You can see here we've modified the prefix for those that are familiar with Creatio, and we're just going to create that. And it doesn't take that long to create because it doesn't have anything inside of it. We click on the wellness activity, completely empty. So now let's do navigation and sections, and we're going to create a new Freedom UI section. And here we're going to do the same thing. This is part of the challenge, is making sure that we get everything that we actually want documented and arranged in a way that makes the most sense. Here, let's do wellness activity log. You can see here we've got that. Let's create that section. And we're not trying to go above and beyond here or follow a ton of best practices, but this is just a quick way of showing you how to get started. If we were going to follow conventional best practices, we would actually create a few different things that establish a better hierarchy so we avoid any issues within Creatio long-term. If you're thinking about taking this verbatim and deploying it internally, you might want to stop here, find a trial environment of Creatio and do it that way. That way you can at least follow along. Now that we have our wellness activity log, we're going to open our form page. Our form page is where all of the fields associated with this come into play, and we get to somewhat start with a very basic experience. Here we're just going to hide the feed. By Xing it out, it doesn't go away, it just removes it from the screen so there's a little bit less clutter. When you're designing within the Creatio form designer, it just makes sense to collapse the things that are not going to be there. So we can't necessarily do anything with this left-hand panel whenever we're modifying or creating new fields. We're just going to leave this as is. At least getting a little bit more screen real estate back allows us to have a better experience. Let's go back to our board mix. And originally we have employees. They're going to have a name and employee ID. The wellness activity, there's going to be a date of the activity, the person that did it, what was the activity, what was the type of activity, how many miles did they go, and how many minutes. In some cases, miles are irrelevant. As we mentioned in previous conversation, miles would not necessarily be a required field because if you do yoga, you're not doing yoga for miles, you're doing yoga for minutes. So we want to be very mindful of the fields we're adding, but at the same time, ensure that we're only focusing on the things that we really want the employees to pay attention to. We've got date, the employee, the activity. Great. By default, we get a name column. This is going to be the activity number, perhaps. And let's do an auto number, wellness activity, or maybe even, well, that makes a little bit more sense. I can imagine there's going to be a lot of these, so I'm going to do that. We're going to make this read only so no one can modify the activity number itself. We are going to not make this required since it's automatically and always going to be produced by Creatio, but we do need a date, activity date. Let's copy that, paste it there, remove the space, and we just want the date. All right. And now maybe we want to start populating some of the other stuff. Actually, we'll pull that here. This was an employee. And as we mentioned a little bit ago, we're using an existing lookup or an existing table within Creatio called contact. We're going to do that. Going to leave auto. We're not going to allow people to add new values. And that's good enough for right now. So if we take a look at here, date, employee, activity. If we look at our thing here, activity is more or less what is the specific activity that is being done. Activity type, we're giving you just an example of how this could look. Run, walk, yoga, strength training, so on and so forth. You can classify this however you want. This is mainly for later on down the road where we can actually apply a weighting system. Maybe we want to emphasize minutes over anything else, but maybe the activity type can do bonus. Maybe we really want to incentivize people to walk. Well, if we implement some sort of point system later on down the road that establishes a leaderboard, then we can actually do that based off of the activity type, as opposed to only the activities. The activity in this case is really just intended to be, what specifically was the person doing. Here, we're going to do the same thing. We'll drag a drop down here, but this time we're actually going to activity. We are going to create a new lookup. On this example, activity, just leave it like that. For activity, provide the code, which I honestly just use whatever the title is because it's easier to find if you ever have to look into the back end of the code within Creatio. I realize I'm throwing a lot of nuance specific to Creatio, but I promise it's not intended to be confusing. It's mainly just commentary for those that are actually replicating this along the way. If I now do the next piece, which is going to be the activity type. And we'll do the same thing here. Wellness type. You can see it can be a little tedious, but that's okay. Once you get into the flow, it's not nearly as bad as it seems. Here we've got activity. Now let's do miles and minutes. Miles and minutes. This is where it gets really interesting as well. You have to be careful in any system that you're doing and be very mindful of the data types. We've been using pretty straightforward data types for the most part. Dates, lookup references, or external table references from the one that we are working with right now. And that applies to B, C, and D of the spreadsheet. Miles and minutes. This is where some systems differentiate and require you to be very specific in the type of decimal or integer or whatever the field might be, because there's a difference. If you notice here, minutes are all rounded off. So this makes sense to put as an integer. However, this has decimal points. Because it has a decimal point, it makes a little bit more sense for this to be an actual decimal type. So let's add a number, and we'll do miles. And miles is going to be decimal, and that's all we need to do for that. And then we're going to do another one that is just a flat out integer. And then we'll do minutes, copy that, paste it there, leave it as an integer, and we're done. And this effectively gives us all of the table items that we need. And here we can honestly play around with the layout if we really want to. Maybe we want the activity type, the miles, and the minutes to be here. Now, if we put this in, nothing is technically required. But if we want to at least impose some sort of requirements, we at least need a few key pieces that are very important. We're going to make the activity date, the employee. Let's do the actual activity itself, make that required, and then the minutes will make this required as well. Now we at least have, at a very bare minimum, the date that an activity was performed, the employee that did it, what they did, and how long they did it. With that, if we click save, this is now going to commit all of these changes to our Creatio system, and we'll effectively have a place to store all of the information that we have listed on our board mix. This is now saved. Let's close that out, and let's go to our wellness activity log list. So we created all of the fields, and now we've got our list here. If we type in all of the various activities, they go into the database. The list view inside of Creatio allows you to see all of those things within a specific list format, if you will. Now that we have columns, we can actually add those to our list. And we likely want to see the activity date, the employee, the minutes, and probably the activity itself. We've got those, and we can arrange it however we really want to. It honestly doesn't necessarily matter. We're going to leave it just like this. We'll leave all the other stuff pretty standardly on the screen like that. Doesn't necessarily mean that we'll use it, but at least it gives us a starting place. Now inside of Creatio, if I go to all apps, I can search for well, and here's the wellness activity log. And on here, we've got what we expect. And if we click new, it takes us to this page here. Now, I can manually go through and validate that I've got all my fields by simply saying 9/1 is the activity date. The employee is Basil. Oh, it's not there. Activity. All right, activity is empty. Activity type is empty. This is where it gets really interesting. We have a choice. We can choose to go in and add all this stuff manually, or we can do it via the upload. The upload within Creatio is going to pre-populate some of our lookups for us automatically, just based off of what's in the spreadsheet. We don't have Basil Malik as an employee. We don't have any activities. We don't have an activity type. Let's go create a few of these manually, and then we'll show you how to do it via an upload. So here, let's go to our company. We are going to add a new contact. This person is going to be some Yahoo named Basil Malik. He is an employee. As I mentioned earlier, we had the option of creating an entirely new database object to house our employees, but here we're taking advantage of the existing object context, which have a type of employee. That's all I really need here. I can save that. Now I've got Basil Malik. If I go into my system designer, go to lookups, I'm going to filter this by well. Again, we created two different things. Wellness example activity. That is the activities such as outdoor run, indoor run, so on and so forth. Activity type is run, walk, whatever we really want from that perspective. So if we open the wellness example activity, can come back to our handy dandy spreadsheet here. We're going to create a new one, call it indoor run. And now let's go to our activity type. We're going to copy a value from the activity type and just paste it in there as well. It doesn't take very much at all to get some basic information into the system. Now, if we go back to this activity date, let's go back to 9/1. Employee is Basil Malik. Activity is indoor run. Activity type is run. This guy ran 3.77 miles in 35 minutes. Not good, not bad, but well, if you will. Dad jokes becoming part of my natural life. We have a activity number here, and now we actually have our first entry. That allowed us to populate the activity, the type, the employee as well. So that is how we do it manually. Now, if we wanted to do this via a spreadsheet and maybe do it a little bit automatically so that some of these other fields populate themselves, I can click on import from Excel. I'll need to actually shut that down because otherwise it'll throw an error saying, hey, you can't upload something to open. Close that, and here we go. Select file. Let's go to this, and there it is right there. Open that, and let's see if it'll let me upload it. Great. The columns were correct, thankfully. And now that it's processed it, I can actually open up my Excel file again, and I can do a quick bit of validation. Here I've got date. It did not map to the column as I had expected it to. That's fine. And simply because I called it activity date inside of Creatio. So we'll map that. And now all of our columns from Excel, which is this left-hand column set, are now mapped to our Creatio column set on the right. I'm going to click next. And now this is asking us specify the duplicate search rule. When we're doing an import, we have the option and capability of mapping duplicate criteria to Creatio whenever we're doing this. So we can tell Creatio if this, this, and this, and this match any other record inside of Creatio that exists already, it is a duplicate. It doesn't need to be created again, but you can update the existing record. So that's basically how Creatio does that. We're going to say activity date, the employee, the activity, probably the minutes. That would be really, really specific in this case. So I'm going to start the data import. It's going to go super fast because I don't have a ton of records. 230 might seem like a lot, but in the world of Creatio, 10,000 is really where it says, okay, that's a lot. As if by magic, we'll click the refresh button here, and we have all of our wellness activities. Now we have quite a few entries here, and I can validate that I only have one entry for 9/1. I have only one entry for 9/1. It's safe to assume that Creatio took that Excel spreadsheet and noticed I've got the same thing here. No need to create a duplicate record. Validate that the contents are the same and move on. Now, the other thing that I want to point out is I mentioned that some things might have to be done automatically versus manually. We manually added the indoor run option, but Creatio through the import noticed that additional values existed and needed to be added. If you have a much more complex set of activities and activity types, it would actually recognize that and create values in the respective lookups automatically. Creatio does its best to try and save you some manual work. That way you don't have to ensure that every single value in a dropdown is there by default. We have effectively created our basic structure. We have got some data inside of it. The next video that we'll do will be emphasizing usability. So taking all of this and then making it more alive, making it more relevant, making it easier to use, making the overall experience much more impactful. So that means streamlining data entry, because we don't necessarily want people to click 5 times to come in here and create a new wellness entry. We want to give them an easier path to log in their activities. That was part of our mission whenever we signed up for this, is to make it easy and to make the reporting capability easier. We've got our operating procedures that we're after, and now we can specify what comes next from a usability standpoint. How do we make the system easier to use? How do we make it easier to use? How do we make the analytics that are a part of Creatio much more compelling? I can easily see something that is eye-appealing and it makes me want to actually take a look at the data. This is a little bit of a stretch. I feel like the only thing that we can really do here is maybe create some sort of leaderboard that says this is a group of people that are exceeding and excelling or leading the pack when it comes to how much they're investing into their own health. It really is just an interesting place to start, but we'll take a look at that on the next video. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much for your time. See you next time. Bye.